Today, I'm going to show you how to make an every second you gain jump power mechanic. If you haven't seen the map that's blown up recently, it hit #1 Discover and everyone's been playing it. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to make a map just like that. If you have any ideas for more tutorials that you'd like to see, please leave them in our community Discord, which you'll find as the first link in the description below. Anyways, let's get right to the tutorial. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. The first thing that we're going to need to do is make our verse file. So go to your verse explorer, right click on your project name and hit add new verse file to project, and I'm going to name this our jump manager and hit create. Then go ahead and open up your verse code. In this, the first thing we're going to need is a way to hold values for each player independently. So to do this, we're going to make a custom variable or a class up here, and we're just going to call this our player jumps, and then initialize it just like so by setting it equal to a class. And then in this, we want each player jumps to have a player corresponding like so. And then we also want a variable, which is going to be their jump value, which I'll set as a float and initialize to 1.0. Now we need to create a map that's going to assign every player to a player jumps class and also initialize all of these players. So first, let's go ahead and create that map. We'll make it a variable and we're going to call it our player jump map of type. Then in our brackets here, we want to put the key, so we'll add a player, and then each player is going to correspond with a player jumps variable, and then we just want to initialize this with an empty map. Now we want to actually add all of our players to this map whenever they join the game. So to do this, whenever the game starts, we want to get all of the current players by going through every single player in get play space dot get players. And then for every single player, we want to initialize player for that player. Let's go down here and make this function called initialize player. And it's going to take in a player like so. You can make this a player or an agent. Because in most cases they're the same thing, I'm just going to use an agent. And we want it to return nothing, so type void. And then in this function, we want to initialize the player. So first, let's go ahead and convert this agent back to a player by saying if player is equal to player agent. Now let's check if that player is already in our player map, because we don't want to add them if they already exist. So we'll say if player exists is equal to our player jump map for our player. And if the player does not exist, then we want to set player jump map player. So we want to set the player jump map that's equivalent to our players, to our player in this map, equal to a instance of this class called player jumps. Here we get an error because we're using these brackets, which means we need to add an if statement like so. So if set player jump map player equal to player jumps, and then this has to be initialized with a player. So we'll just set this player variable equal to our player that we have here. Now each player exists in this player jump map and has their own jump value that is assigned to them. And now we actually need to increase this variable every single second. So to do that, so there's one more thing we need to do when initializing players, and that's going to be getting the new players who join the game during the match. So to do that, you want to get play space dot player added event like so, and then dot subscribe. And then we just want to initialize the player who joined like so. Now what we need to do is increase the jump value for every single player every single second. So to do that, under onBegin, I'm going to call a new function, and I'm going to spawn this function because it's going to have a loop in it. So I'm going to say spawn and say our increase player jumps loop, and we don't need to send it anything. Now let's go ahead and make this function by copying the name like so, and then making sure it suspends and return nothing. Now in this, we want a loop. So to do that, just write loop, and then we want to sleep. So sleep will just wait 1 second. So now we're just looping every single second. And then every single second, we want to go through every single player in the game. So every single player in get play space dot get players, just like so. And then we want to actually get the corresponding player jumps value that each player holds. So to do that, just write a comma here, and then we'll say our PJ for player jumps is equal to player jump map for this player. So now this accesses our map for the player and gets the corresponding player jumps. And all we want to do is set our pj dot jump value plus equal to 1. Here we get an error because we need to add 1.0 because this is a float value, so we have to add a float value. So now we have a value that's increasing for every single player every single second, but this value doesn't do anything yet. So let's go ahead and make that happen. To do this, first we need an input trigger device. So let's go ahead and make an editable input trigger of type input trigger device. And you just initialize it with a basic input trigger device like so. What this trigger device is used for is going to track whenever the player jumps. So we need to go down here under on begin and write input trigger dot pressed event dot subscribe, and we want to subscribe to handle jump, which will make a new function for it down here called handle jump. It's going to take an agent of type agent and return nothing. Now in this, we want to convert our agent to a for character so that we can check if the player is currently in the air or not. Because currently the input trigger, if we only track if the player presses the jump button, that'll allow them to press the jump button while they're in the air and just spam the jump button and jump up infinitely. So we don't want that. So instead, we'll get the for character by saying fc is equal to our agent dot get fort character, and then we need to use characters in order to use the get for character function. And then we want to say if our fc dot is in air, like so. This will check if the player is currently in the air, and we want to only activate this if the player is not in the air, so I'll just add a not beforehand. So whenever a player jumps, if the player is not currently in the air, then we want to boost the player. What we're going to use to boost the player's jump is going to be a movement modulator device. Unfortunately, in the movement modulator device, you don't have an option to actually change the boost amount, so we're going to have to use several movement modulator devices. So to create several movement modulator devices, I'll make an editable, and we're going to call this our jump boosters, and of type an array of movement modulator device, and we initialize it with an empty array. So now what we want to do is find the corresponding jump booster to the player's jump value. So to get the player's jump value, we need to get the player jump from the player map for this agent. So to do that, I'll just add a comma here and say our pj is equal to our player jump map agent, just like we did down here. Now we want to get the jump booster that corresponds with this. So we'll say if new jump booster, or I'll write new jb for jump booster, is equal to our jump boosters and then our pj.jump value, just like this. The issue we get here is because you can't actually get an element from an array using a float. It has to be an integer. So let's go ahead and convert that by first writing jump value int is equal to our int. So this will just convert whatever float we put in this function to an integer, and we want to convert our pj.jump value and then add a comma here at the end, and then just write our jump value int instead of our float jump value. Now just write new jb dot activate. We want to activate the jump booster for our agent. Alright, so there's a couple more things that I want to do before we actually test this out. The first of which is I actually want to display this jump value on the screen so we can know what jumps for each individual player, so the player can know what jump value they're even at. So to do this, I'm going to first create a text block for each player in our player jumps class. So I'm going to make a var, and it's going to be our jump text of type text block equals to text block. Then here we're going to get an error because we need to use fortnite.com/UI. Now what we need to do is create a function that's going to increase our jump value, set the text of our jump text to our jump value. Here I'm actually just going to create a function called collect jump, and we're going to receive a float, which will just be called the amount, and it's going to return nothing or of type void. Now in this, we need to first increase the jump value. So we'll say set jump value plus equal to the amount that we want to increase it by, and then we want to set our jump value text. So jump text dot set text, and then you want to set the text to the jump value. But this isn't going to work because we actually need to convert this into a message. So to do that, I'm going to create a function that we can use that's going to localize a string to a message. What I did there, I wrote message and pressed tab. This isn't normal. To get this snippet, this is actually from an extension. To get this, you can click on your extensions here in VS Code and search for this verse language snippets. It's very helpful, has a lot of different quick snippets that you can add into your scripts that save you time. So this is going to be called our string to message function. So what we need to do is convert a string to a message like so, but our jump value isn't a string, it's a float. So let's go ahead and put it in quotation marks and then also add brackets around it, because if we didn't add the brackets, it would just print jump value or add jump value. Now we actually have a function that's going to be increasing our jump value. We can go ahead and go down here, and instead of setting our jump value here, we'll just say pj.collect jump, and we can collect 1.0 jumps, so 1 jump. Now we need to actually add this text block to the player's UI. So to do this, what we'll do is create another function for each player, and we're going to call this add UI. It can return nothing, it can take in nothing and return nothing. And now in this, we need to first get the player's UI. So I'll say if player UI is equal to get player UI, and we want to get it for the player that corresponds with this class, and then we'll get an error because we need to use temporary UI. So just go ahead and copy that and add it up here. Now we need to create a canvas that has this jump text on it and add it to the player's UI. So I'm going to create a new canvas, and it's going to be equal to a canvas where first we need to specify that we're adding all of the different slots, and then we need to make a slot, and then in this slot we need to specify the widget first. So I'll add the jump text as our widget. Then we need to add our anchors. So to actually know what to put here, you want to go back into UEFN, go to your content folder, hit right click, user widget, make a widget blueprint, create a user widget, and I'm going to call this our example text, and then open it up. Here we'll drag our canvas, which will be equivalent to the new canvas in our code, and then we want to add a slot, which will be a text block, and then go ahead and position it on this canvas. So I want the jump value to appear up here in the middle. I'm going to change the anchors to the top middle and then center this. I'll change the alignment X to be 0, so I can change the position X to be 0. Now let's go ahead and recreate this in verse. So first we have our anchors, which is going to be equal to a set of anchors where our minimum is equal to a vector 2. Also add an S here. And for vector 2, we need to include spatial math, so just go ahead and do that. Now in this vector 2, our X was 0.5 and our Y was 0. If you don't know how that works, it's because our X is halfway. We're talking about our anchors, so our X is halfway down the screen and our Y is at the top of the screen. So both of those values start here and end at 1, 1 down here. Now we need to do the same thing, but for our maximum. So go ahead and add a comma and say our maximum is equal to the exact same factor. So I'm just going to copy and paste it. Now we need to add our offsets. So this is going to be equal to a margin. Our left value, if we go back, is going to be 0. And then our top value is going to be 135. So let's add those. Our left is equal to 0. And then our top is equal to 135. Now our next two values are going to be the right, which is 165, and the bottom, which is going to be 40. So our right is equal to 165 and our bottom is equal to 40. Now we can do the alignment, which is equal to another vector 2, where the X is equal to 0.5 and our Y was equal to 0.0. Then go ahead and add size to content, and that's just going to be false. And then you can add a Z order as well, but it's not needed, but I'll just go ahead and initialize it with a 0. All right, so now we've actually created our canvas. We just need to really quick add it to our player UI by just writing player UI dot add widget, and we want to add our new canvas. Now we actually need to call this function for the player whenever they get initialized. So let's go back down here until our initialize player function. And we need to add a then and make another if statement. So we'll say if our PJ is equal to the player jump map. So right after initializing the player to a class, go ahead and get that class, and we want to get the class of our player. Then we want to just say PJ dot add UI. So we want to call this function whenever they get initialized so that it adds this widget to their screen. And just like that, it's now going to display on the player's UI. So now let's go ahead and set this up in game. All right, so now back in UEFN, you want to hit verse, build a verse code, and the jump manager will appear in your content folder. Then go ahead and drag and drop it. The first thing we need is an input trigger. So let's go ahead and get an input trigger device like so, and then drag it onto the play space. I'm going to change the input type to standard action, and then the input to jump. I'm going to disable show on HUD. This is just a preference thing. And then just go ahead and select it on my device. Then we have our jump boosters. So this is going to be our movement modulator devices. So let's go ahead and get a movement modulator and then drag it into the play space like so. In this, disable affect movement speed and enable apply impulse. Change the forward impulse to 0 because we don't want them to go forward. Disable the visible during game to no. And then you want to select the upward impulse that you would like. So you want to start out something small like 50, and I'm going to rename this to our jump booster 1. Then you want to duplicate it. You can just Control C, Control V, and then increase the forward or the upward impulse. So I'll just change this to 150 and then do the same thing, 250. And you want to do this, unfortunately, for every single level that you plan to have. So 350, 450, and so on. The max is 6,000, and you want to continue this until you get to the maximum, which is 5,000. So I'll be back after I've added around 20 of these. All right, so I went ahead and created 25 of these. Now you want to go back to your device and add all of the jump boosters. So you want to add 25 elements and then select each in order. That is important. So you just go ahead and select them and then select the jump booster that it corresponds with. If you can't see the numbers, you can actually go ahead and expand this. That way it's easier to keep track. So I'll be back after I go ahead and add all of these. All right, so I went ahead and added all 25 that I created. Now let me go ahead and push changes and test this out in game. All right, so now in game, if I go ahead and launch session, you'll see our jump value is displayed on the UI. And whenever I jump, it's actually a little glitchy. You can see it's not actually working. So let's go ahead and really quick fix that. I will end game, go back into our verse code. And after we apply our jump, we actually want like a little smidge of delay before it activates, because whenever it jumps and activates the jump booster at the same time, it creates that little bit of lag. So to do that, we need to create a second handle jump function, because we can't just make this one suspends. If we do, then you'll see we get this error. So instead, I'll just make another function. I'm actually going to duplicate our handle jump, and I'm going to call this our pre-handle jump. Remove the suspends, and then in this, all we have to do is just spawn this other handle jump function like so. And then here, we'll just call the pre-handle jump instead. All this does is just allows us to set up this suspending function, which then allows us to go ahead and add a sleep for 0.0 seconds before we activate the jump booster for the player. Also, in case you missed it, our jump text was displaying with a lot of zeros, and also we don't want this to start at 1, so I'll just go ahead and change that to 0. But let's go ahead and fix that display issue. So to do that, we actually want to convert our jump text to an integer before we set the text here. So I'll just go ahead and write an if statement. So if our new jump value is equal to int, so this will just convert whatever we put in these brackets to an integer, and then we write our jump value in it. Then we can go ahead and press tab and add our new jump value here and set the jump text to the integer rather than the float amount that's going to have a ton of zeros. Alright, now let's go ahead and minimize this and hit verse and push verse changes. Alright, now let's go ahead and start the game. So in the game, you can now see it displays as integers, and whenever we jump, we don't get that glitch. But as we continue to jump, we should be jumping higher and higher every time. And I'll even build so we can kind of see this more so. And as we get higher and higher, it's going to eventually stop working after 25, which we don't want. If we do hit the maximum height, we don't want the jumps to stop working altogether. So now let's go ahead and fix that. Let's go back into the verse code and then find here. The issue is that this new jump booster is failing because we don't have a jump booster for an amount higher than our max array amount. So what we'll do is just add an else statement here, and then we'll add another if and say if our maximum JB or maximum jump booster is equal to our jump boosters. So we look at our jump boosters array, and what we want to do is we need to get our jump boosters dot length, but because our array starts at 0 rather than 1, we want to subtract this by 1. And then just like we did here, we want to sleep 0.0 seconds and then activate our jump booster. All right, now let's try that again. Just hit verse, build verse code and push changes. All right, so now in game, I'll be back whenever we hit 25. All right, so now you'll see works completely fine. And after 25, it still activates the maximum and doesn't cancel, but we're not going to get any higher because we don't have any more jump boosters. So to fix that, you just want to add more jump boosters. There's one more thing that I'm going to add really quickly. So let's end game, go back to our verse code. And this is going to be a way to actually reset the jump value. So to do that, I'm first going to go ahead and create a function called reset jump, and we don't actually have to take in anything and we can return void. So all we're going to do is set jump value equal to 0.0 because it's a float, and then go ahead and copy how we set the text here so that it'll refresh the text. And then we just need to call this function whenever we want to reset it. So I'll just go ahead and actually make a reset trigger. So I'll make an editable reset trigger of type trigger device, just like so. And now we need to actually activate a function for this trigger. So I'll say reset trigger dot triggered event dot subscribe, and we'll reset the player. Now let's go ahead and make a reset player function. Because it's a trigger, it's actually going to take an optional agent. So instead of an agent, we'll have to put a question mark beforehand and then return nothing. So first we need to make an if statement that's going to convert this optional back to a normal agent by saying if agent is equal to m agent with a question mark at the end. Then we want to go ahead and get our player jump class that corresponds with the player who activated this trigger by saying if PJ is equal to player jump map for the agent. Then we just want to call that reset function remade up here. And then to set this up, just go ahead and hit build verse code. And then in here we have the reset trigger. So we just search for a trigger device. And if I drag it down, then select it in my device. And then because we made a new editable and had to select a new device, I have to push changes and then test it out. All right, so now that we're in game, as you can see, we are slowly jumping higher and higher every single time. But if we go ahead and press this trigger, we reset to 0, and so does our jumps. Anyways, that's everything that you need to know to be able to create the every second you gain a jump mechanic. If we can get this video to 200 likes, I'll create a part 2 where I show how to make the progress bar that appears for every player that'll show how long they need to wait in between every single jump increase. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.